lockstep march into hell. Because once men had this notion of male paternity, it became more important to know who your children were than it was to participate in the orgiastic, group-minded bonding that had previously occurred. And once you have the notion of my child, then it moves naturally to my woman, my weapons, my food, my hunting ground, my everything. The recognition of male paternity gave permission for the growth of ego. And ego, and this was all a continuous thought, those of you who doubted, this was all a continuous thought. Ego is our problem, and we always had it when we were squirrel monkeys, howler monkeys, proboscis monkeys, and all that. We only lost it in that very brief window of opportunity, maybe 20, maybe 30, 40,000 years long, when, as we evolved into the grassland, we included in our diet essentially a drug which corrected our primate nature, a drug which suppressed the expression of male dominance, a drug which promoted an orgiastic sexual style that promoted group values. Because you see, and this is the point to my mind about psychedelics, what they do, not, my trip or your trip, which we could spend hours trading stories about, but when you try and talk about what is the effect of the psychedelic experience, not one or two of them, but 100,000 of them, what generalizations can we make? The generalization that I have found most powerful is the psychedelic experience dissolves boundaries. That's what it does. And boundaries are what chain, diminish, define, and degrade us. And we are always creating them, and we are always struggling with dissolving them. And the ultimate boundary is this belief in the sanctity of the ego versus everything else in the cosmos. And I believe that that the ego arose in a context of language, culture, religion, and so forth, simply because we evolved in the African grassland, and the climate itself underwent changes that eventually placed the mushroom out of reach. And this is why the fall into history. This is what that Genesis story about that I call history's first drug bust. This is what it's about. I mean, isn't it a little peculiar that the Ur myth of our culture opens with a drug bust? It's the story of a woman, right, those bad women, a woman who corrupts her roommate, and then they both get kicked out. And they break the lease, essentially, and they both get kicked out. And where they get kicked out of is into history. And I believe that the Genesis story, definitely told and created at a time when patriarchy was on a roll, is a memory of this break with this orgiastic, goddess-centered, nomadic, cattle-oriented, mushroom-using form of human pastoralism. Now, notice in this scenario that there are no villains per se. The planet began to get dry, and that's what broke up this arboreal, papaya-oriented paradise in the treetops, where everybody was male-dominated and mindless as a tomato, but having a good time. The drying of the African continent broke that party up, created a mixed ecology of forest and grassland, into which the primates then evolved this fascinating relationship with the cattle, you see. And much of what I say here is orthodox evolutionary theory. It's just the part about psilocybin that nobody else will touch with a 10-foot pole. But moving out into the grassland, testing foods, accepting psilocybin into the diet, and then creating, based on the interruption of the natural tendency toward male dominance, it was fixed 50,000 years ago. A pharmacological intervention on the entire species created then a situation of partnership. The women were the gatherers, the men were the hunters. This had to do with promotion of different body types that was already well established in these primates. I mean, you get this throughout the primates. The large male, barrel-chested, the more diminutive female, and the females largely more social than the male. The males hunt. And in the proto-hominid situation, this was certainly true. And hunting, as you know, if you've ever done it, places a great premium on stoic waiting. That's the hunter's job, is to sit down and keep your mouth shut and watch silently until it's time to make your move, and then move ruthlessly, without question, with attention. Women had a completely different set of pressures and constraints on them. As gatherers, it was very important for women to be able to communicate extraordinarily subtle aspects of the material world to each other, so that a woman needs to be able to say, when she comes into camp with the apron full of nuts, I got these near the waterfall, by the bush with the small yellow leaves, with the waxy flowers and the red berries that has the dry grass underneath it. In other words, for a gatherer, there is tremendous premium put on being able to describe your environment. You must be able to communicate, because a woman who makes a food find can only bring back to camp as much food as she can carry. But if she can communicate to her sisters what is going on, then no problem. So language, I believe, largely evolved as a prerogative of women. And this stoicism and ability to tolerate uncomfortable conditions was evolved by men.